My name is Sherry Conrad and I'm with RMTC-DHH. I'm going to be monitoring the room for our presenters today. Welcome to this 1-hour webinar titled Keeping Your Hat On, Hearing Assistive Technology. I'm joined by Lynn Misko, ASHA certified and Florida licensed speech language pathologist and audiologist, as well as listening and spoken language certified specialist, and Dr. Chrissy Sanchez, an assistant professor and clinical audiologist at the University of Miami University of Miami Ear Institute. Both presenters currently practice at the University of Miami Debbie School in their Auditory Oral Program. After this presentation is complete, we're going to take some questions. You should know a bit about the Zoom environment before we begin. Today's webinar is being closed captioned. To see the closed captions, click the Captions button in the Zoom menu and captions will appear along the bottom of your screen. Thank you so much to Ann Armstrong with Alternative Communication Services for providing the captions for us today. We want to make sure everyone can contribute to the conversation. Even though your mic is muted, we want to hear your questions, comments, and your thoughts, and for you to have the capability to interact with others in this room. If you don't see the chat panel, click the chat panel in the Zoom menu, and you can select specific attendees to chat with during this webinar. Above the field where you enter text, you'll see a blue drop-down menu. You should be able to select everyone if you want to communicate with everyone. We will be monitoring the chat during the presentation. We mentioned it in our email notifications, but this webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on the RMTC-DHH TA Live webpage. As a reminder, we do request that you take a post survey for TA Live at the end of this session. We thank you in advance to contributing to our continued self-assessment of our work. With all that business done, I want to welcome Lynn Misko and Chrissy Sanchez. Thank you, ladies, for being here today. The floor is yours.
Hey, we're excited. We feel like we're cutting edge on how everybody's going to be learning pretty soon. Again, I'm Lynn Misko. I direct the Auditory Oral Education Program at the University of Miami Debbie School. And we're really fortunate to get to work with Dr. Sanchez. She assists us in keeping our auditory access going for all of our students. We know what a challenge that is. Every day a student comes in with different technology, how to sync it all together and make it work. So we're really fortunate to get to share her resources and her knowledge. And now you all have that advantage too. So really my name on the presentation is really tech support. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Sanchez and she will answer so many of the questions we know you've had.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you everybody for having me. I'm really excited to host this month's TA Live presentation on hearing assistive technology. For sure, this is a rather equivocal topic and could probably be spoken about for several hours, but I only have one of them, so I will make sure that I keep it timely. Now, I do want to disclose, I have a clicker that just works a little fast. My only disclosure is that I'm a research investigator for a Mattel study. I also want to disclose at this point that I am probably by trade and by profession a clinical audiologist, and just recently started to collaborate with the Debbie School in an educational audiology role. And that not only has been a very unique opportunity for me, but it's really opened my eyes on the reality of the utilization of hearing assistive technology and the challenges really that it poses, especially in an auditory oral program where the majority of the children in these classroom settings are hearing impaired and use a multitude of different devices that we have to find kind of the common denominator to help them hear ideally. So with that being said, a lot of this is not as intuitive to me as it may come off on this presentation. And really the technology is just drastically changing so quickly that what may be presented today may change in a month from now. But I do hope that you all can use this presentation as a resource because I think it is at least helpful from a general perspective to just kind of take a deep breath and not feel so intimidated when dealing with hearing assistive technology. Here's where we are, perfect. So the aims of today's presentation, I wanted to review the fundamentals and characteristics of noise Again, not from a scientific background, but merely from how it's relevant to why we're even utilizing this kind of technology. And then a brief history of hearing assistive technology, where we started and where we are now, the benefits, the caveats, what currently exists, and then what else is out there. So we're going to start with how noisy the world is. The impacts of noise exposure are obviously well established. OSHA has regulated those standards for quite some time now, and they regulate these noise standards because they can be detrimental to someone's hearing. And actually the impact of noise has far later consequences, so they're usually not immediate, in that if you go to a concert or you're routinely around loud construction noise without hearing protection, the symptoms or the consequences of that may not actually be received for another 10 to 15 years. And this has been well established in the literature. And there's a lot of noise that we live around that is just unavoidable. The challenges exist for normal hearing listeners, so we're not talking about hearing impaired students at this time, but talking in a restaurant with the plates clinking and the dishes and the noise and the ambiance and the music, going to parties, events, gatherings. This is a problem, right? We know that the world is a noisy place for people who have normal hearing. And so we are now entering this noisy place for those who have hearing loss, and we are dealt with a little bit, double our challenges. So we characterize noise rather uniquely from an audiology side to help us evaluate the benefit of technology in general, not just hearing assistive technology. And probably the biggest quantifier of how we utilize noise and how we can quantify that is using an SNR, which is a signal to noise ratio. And quite simply, this is just the level of the signal that we want to listen to. So in a classroom would be the teacher. And we're comparing that to the level of the environmental noise. So whether that's the students, the students tapping on a desk, someone asking questions, someone knocking on the door. And we compare that in a ratio where if there's a positive number, so say a positive 35 SNR means that the speech source is 35 decibels louder than background noise. This is a great environment. You can hear this audibly. However, a negative SNR, which is something like negative 15, means that the signal is softer than the noise, and the noise is that much louder, and this is a yikes environment, right? And so this is probably one of our bigger quantifiers of how we classify noise. And this is just a drawing that I did. I do love to draw. I feel like I maybe want to be like a children's illustrator in the future, but those are my previous calling. But I work very much visually, and so I wanted to illustrate how SNR affects this lovely couple enjoying their dinner in this vacant restaurant. But the reality is that a restaurant doesn't look like this. We have, our waiters, and then we have family members who enter, and those plates are clanking, and the waiters are still taking their orders, and then there's the bros over here that are enjoying their beers, and all these people come in to an environment where it becomes much noisier than what this couple is speaking at an average of a 65 decibels, so to speak. And I wanted to quantify these colors as just the amount of background noise. And if we're now in an environment where it's 95 decibels compared to that 65 dB of what we're trying to listen to, we're at a negative 30 SNR. And that is a very challenging listening environment and can sometimes be emulated in a classroom setting. So not just a restaurant condition, but classrooms can sometimes get to these levels. And that's really hard to listen for as a normal hearing listener. And you can only imagine the challenges that these hearing impaired kids have as well. So on top of signal to noise ratio, we also can quantify noise by reverberation, which is really just the time. It's a time source, and really just the time it takes for sound to get from one area to another. So, we don't want echoes essentially. So if you're shouting off a mountain, it's going to take maybe a few seconds for you to continuously hear your voice. And that's really challenging for hearing technology to quantify. We also characterize it by distance. So it has been said in the literature that we lose about 6 decibels with every doubling of distance. And if we think about distance in a classroom, if a teacher is 1 foot away from you, going from 1 foot to 2 feet may not be as big of a deal, but we're losing about 6 dB with just that small change of distance from the teacher's sound source. And then we have more subjective factors, such as the talker-dependent factors. How much effort is the teacher putting into their voice, the spectrum of their speech, the rate at which they're talking. Are they fast talkers like myself? That is my Hispanic roots. How do they articulate? Do they have an accent? And their orientation, so are they facing the students or are they facing the whiteboard? We also have language-dependent factors, such as what vocabulary level, grammar, the idea, and the context. And then, of course, our listener-dependent factors, such as what is the chronological versus developmental age of the listener. And so that's going to really kind of tie into their cognition. What's their hearing status and their attention status, and how they're processing and their fluency of just understanding. So there's just a lot of things we have to consider when we talk about just simply noise. So if we take what we know about noise and we put it into a classroom sphere, there was a study conducted in 2005 that just measured the noise levels in classrooms, and the average classroom measured to be about a 68 dBA. A school auditorium was about 79 dBA, and a school cafeteria was about 82 dBA. And before I continue, dBA is just simply, I don't want any, it's a technical term to classify a decibel, and it's really just a weighted average. So it's a filter that they put when they're measuring noise to de-emphasize the low frequency sound. So when we talk about noise in general, or if you look at literature that talks about noise standards, they usually use a dBA. That's all that means, doesn't otherwise mean anything else. But if we talk about SNRs, right, so we know that these average classrooms have these noise levels. This is just their standing noise, their stagnant noise. What about the signal to noise ratio? So let's put a teacher in this condition, and let's look at these average ratios for about 47 classrooms. And in 17 kindergarten classrooms, the average signal to noise ratio was -1 dB, where the noise was 1 dB louder than the teacher. And that's pretty even. That's an actually very challenging listening environment where the noise and the teacher are at the same volume. Whereas 12 elementary school classrooms had about a +5, and 12 high school classrooms also had a +5. And these levels were recorded in traditional classroom settings, and this data was also collected in 1965. And I don't know who can here attest to what a classroom looked like in 1965, but it doesn't look like that anymore. And I wasn't alive in 1965.
I know what it looks
but
like.
I can almost guarantee that a classroom did not look like how they do in 2020. And so when we think about 2020 classroom spaces, we're talking about different floor plans and how the teachers and the students are oriented. And we have enclosed classrooms, which may take up to about 25 students, compared to semi-open classrooms, which are about 40+ students. And then our open classrooms, which we can more quantify as maybe a college auditorium, which is about 91 to 200 students. And these just really they just are more susceptible to more intrusive noise levels. And subjective data in normal hearing listeners confirm that obviously both the student and the teacher are reporting annoyance in these settings, obviously so. So we know that these classrooms are noisy, and we know that children have to do a lot of listening in these noisy classrooms. So children spend about nearly 60% of their classroom time engaged in listening, although maybe that's probably the intent, right? 60% of a classroom time, you want these children to be actively listening. So you can imagine the negative effects of noise has on these children who spend 50% of their effort just focusing on hearing for the purposes of learning, right? And we throw in noise in this situation, and now we have to really quantify the impact that this has on children who are hearing impaired. Background noise in general has demonstrated to be detrimental in reading scores for elementary school age children who are normal hearing. So the higher the background noise, the poorer the reading scores. And so what is our reality? Children are requiring much more complete and efficient auditory information and better listening environments than adults do in order to learn and develop speech and language. And that's really just the kind of the bread and butter, or the meat and potatoes, I suppose, whatever you prefer it to your meal, of the crux of it, right? They need a clean space. They need a clean drawing board. we can't throw them into an environment that has already been tampered with and is very noisy. They need a clean slate to really optimize their learning environment. So how is it regulated? Fortunately, we have ANSI, and we call this ANSI to the rescue, sort of. And I only say sort of because the American National Standards Institute, they do provide guidelines and recommendations for classroom acoustics. And they're very good guidelines. They say that an unoccupied classroom must not exceed 35 dB, that's very soft, and that's great. And that the SNR in an ideal classroom should be plus 15 at ear level. So the teacher should always be at least 15 decibels louder than any noise source at the level of the listening level. And an unoccupied classroom reverberation must not surpass 0.6 to 0.7 seconds. The caveat, which is why we say sort of, is that this is only a mere recommendation and not necessarily a standard that needs to be abided by. Some newer schools may have to adapt to these standards in order to be up to their building code. So a lot of times some buildings want to say they claim to have the ANSI standards, but again, it's just a recommendation. And so if we think about hearing loss and noise, so now we're really getting into the depth of it. If we remember our SNR, generally speaking, individuals with hearing loss required at least a +5 to a +18 SNR in order to obtain speech recognition scores similar to their normal hearing peers. So on average, these children with hearing loss are needing about 5 to 20 dB louder in order to score the same as their normal hearing peers. They're definitely not on an even playing field at this point. And our objective data suggests the same, that children listening in a classroom, so if we imagine a very noisy classroom with typical background noise, our normal hearing children are only getting about 70% of that understanding, where a child with hearing loss is gonna get 50%. And now we've created a room with high reverberation and a significant listening and noise condition. Our normal hearing kids are only getting 30%, while the hearing loss children are getting 11% word understanding. That's huge.
That's crazy.
And it's not okay. Not okay for the normal hearing kids, let alone those children with hearing loss. These are really tough listening environments. And we don't quantify listening as just the objective, well, this is an SNR and they're going to struggle. What about listening effort? Because that's really been quantified a lot in the data as well. And the literature shows that listening effort, the children with hearing loss show significantly more listening effort than their normal hearing peers. There was a study that compared children's ages 5 to 11 with either mild to moderate hearing loss or a high frequency hearing loss. And they chose these two hearing loss cohorts because these are usually the hearing losses that are probably least aided. Our mild to moderate kids, well, as an audiologist, we're recommending amplification. I suppose the parents, the buy-in to these types of hearing loss is a little bit more challenging because parents don't notice these hearing impairments as much, especially with high frequency hearing losses. But they chose these cohorts of hearing loss groups because they wanted to prove a point that even in these hearing loss, not our severe to profound kids, not our moderately severe kids where we're obviously saying that they need hearing technology, these are the kids that we're recommending it. The family was like, we'll think about it. The effort was significantly higher in both easy and difficult listening conditions. So these kids are reporting that they're struggling. And additional effort is required to listen in noise that may compromise the student's ability to perform simultaneous tasks. And I think this really comes into play when the child transitions from learning how to listen to listening in order to learn. And that's really when they have to listen to then start taking notes and listening to then perform a multi-step task. And that really becomes challenging when we're adding noise and reverberation and really challenging noise conditions to these kids' plates. So what do we do about it? We know that amplification helps, right? It really does. It helps children hear everything, and we mean everything, right? And what I mean by this is that amplification is amplifying everything, right? So it's also amplifying both the noise and the teacher's voice. And while technology has significantly advanced in that we have directional microphones and noise processing strategies for these technologies, they are man-made devices and they do amplify noise. And I would actually probably argue, as a pediatric audiologist who I kind of remove all of the personalizational settings where maybe an adult may have different programs for a noise environment, and so to speak, these kids are being set to just go. We don't want them fiddling with their technology. We don't want them altering their volume levels. So these kids are truly kind of getting full amplification and probably an omni setting where the microphones are picking up what's around them, because that's important, right? For incidental learning, we do want the kids to hear what's going on behind them as well as what's going on in front of them. But in a noisy environment, you can see this is a challenge, because now we're also amplifying the noise that we so desperately want them to avoid. And if the signal is really too difficult, hearing aids, bone anchor devices, and cochlear implants have trouble filtering what's important versus what isn't important. I mean, we are approaching AI technology, but thus far, there is not a smart little human in there being like, well, that's the teacher, and that's little Jimmy, and we don't want to listen to Jimmy today, we want to listen to the teacher. And it's really just hard for these devices to pick up and reduce certain noise areas unless there's a manual program to do that, or unless they're set to do that. And I would, like I stated before, would probably venture on the side that as a pediatric audiologist, we've usually set them to want to hear everything versus having the hearing aid choose. But the good news is that personal H.A.T systems used with conjunction with amplification are widely recognized as the most effective method to improve these speech recognition in noisy environments. So there's a solution, and that's why we're here today. So to mimic how H.A.T would work in a situation like this, here's another little drawing. We have our teacher here, and we have our child here with her bilateral cochlear implants, and she's followed her IEP. She's sitting right in the front, and she's getting just direct access to that teacher. And this classroom is very great because she's the only one in it. But the reality is that maybe it looks more like this, and even this, you'd be like, this is a great classroom, I want to teach in there. But the true reality is that it probably looks more like this, with all these kids making all of this ruckus, and then we have the alarm that may go off, or the door is knocking, or there's cars outside honking, or the air is rumbling. And the reality is we want to create a listening environment that's more like this. We want to remove all of those external factors. And the way we can do that is by putting on our H.A.T technology, and just put a little hat on this teacher, both an actual hat and a hat. And really that's what the point is. So this cochlear implant is going to be receiving whatever the teacher is wearing. She's going to be wearing some form of technology that's going to be streaming directly to that child's device. So I wanted to quickly review the tree of H.A.T, and this really also kind of hones into the history of H.A.T, and I used a palm tree because we are in Miami, Florida. An ode to Miami. Palm trees never get considered in more of a tree of life schematic, so I wanted to do their part here. And so if we have hearing assistive technology as the leaves of our palm tree, then this would be our base, in that we have our standard FM, our dynamic FM, our adaptive digital FM system. Then we have probably more historically our induction loop system, our infrared system, and our Bluetooth and remote microphone system. And what I'm going to be covering today is probably everything on the left side. Induction loop, more like looped environments, is probably, well, if our classrooms could be looped, that'd be great, but I'm more working on a telecoil system, and our infrared system is slightly outdated, so we won't be reviewing those two as much, but we also will be reviewing our Bluetooth and remote microphone options as well. For who? So who does this help? It helps everybody. Children with normal hearing can help with hearing assistive technology. Children with hearing loss and children with auditory processing difficulties are usually our group of kids that we want to focus on. And if we're incorporating the normal hearing kids, then we're including everybody, really. But H.A.T has been proven to help with attention, behavior, fatigue, academic performance, speech and language outcomes. I mean, there's really, there's no real negative to it, with the exception of cost and the configuration of this ever adapting technology, in that you have spent a lot of money purchasing all of this technology, and in 1 year it is worthless, because all these kids have now upgraded technology and you have antiquated technology that can be used for maybe 1 or 2 kids. And figuring out that combination is truly the solution that I am not providing for you today. So I hope nobody has that expectation, but I'm here to talk about the real transparency behind it, and this is probably why it is less used is because it's very confusing, but it is so beneficial for these kids. So I hope that there's more positive taken away from this than any negative. So let's start about FM versus DM. And these kind of terms are used interchangeably, and they're talking about more traditional FM, which traditional FM is really actually not used in today's technology anymore. This is more of on a linear model. What the FM did was that it always kept the signal or the speech source 10 dB above the noise, no matter what. It didn't adapt. It didn't matter if the signal was 10 dB, so if someone was whispering. And the trouble with that was that things like whispers became no longer whispers. They were much louder to the child who had hearing devices than everybody else. And that's important because when we program things like amplification, we do want to see that children can separate soft understanding versus their speech loud understanding. And what was happening with traditional FM system is that it was keeping everything 10 dB louder. Whoever was wearing that microphone was going to be 10 dB louder. It didn't matter the background noise. And so a lot of that technology then shifted to more of an adaptive FM system where the SNR would vary. So that signal to noise ratio was varying depending on the ambient noise. So this is probably a little more smarter technology, and that the transmitter was always feeling out the environment and recording the noise level. And if the noise increased to above a 57 dB SPL, then the FM kicked in and the SNR was increased automatically based on that noise level. So this is really great because it was adapting to the child's environment and it was a little more consistent. So soft sounds remain soft. Those kids may not, if it's a truly quiet environment and the only person speaking is the teacher, the child with hearing devices may not need that assistance, but ever since that noise level starts increasing, that's when the child needs the help and that's when the FM is kicking in. And then we talk about our DM. So it's just really a different way that the signal is being transferred and allowing for a wider bandwidth and is intended to provide a greater SNR at higher noise levels. So it's just far more advanced than the adaptive FM system, and really the foundation of what we now know today as the Roger technology is using digital modulation. And I would say that Phonak, who's the proprietary owner of the Roger system, they're probably in the forefront of just the H.A.T in general. And they have kind of steered, there's a lot of research to show that even Roger technology is superior to traditional DM, adaptive FM, and even traditional FM. This was just a graph done by a study done in Texas, UT Dallas, and they tested children. It's only an N of 10, so only 10 kids. And they tested them using a hearing and noise test. And what they saw was that if you see the polka dotted, the fairly white bar is using a fixed traditional FM. Our hatched bar in the middle is using an adaptive FM. And the dark black bar is using the adaptive digital FM. And what you can see, and what I wanted to highlight here, was that in noise levels, just quiet, up until probably 60 to 65, they're performing fairly the same. And you can really see that adaptive and digital FM start improving performance because they're constantly regulating that noise environment, where just making the sound source 10 dB higher really doesn't help in a very noisy environment. Because now you imagine you're having a child listen to a voice at 90 dB with still 80 dB of noise. It's not actually actively reducing anything, it's just making everything else louder. And what we see here, what this study concluded, was that digital was by far superior than any fixed or adaptive FM system. So all of that is to say, and like I mentioned before, is that today's modern day FM systems are all using DM sort of technology. So you don't have to worry that you're compromising anything in today's technology. And then I wanted to briefly review the RM systems. So a lot of these acronyms are usually used interchangeably. Like, oh, do you have RM on your kids? Do you have a DM or an FM? And they're more commonly all used to replace FM. But I really wanted to have this slide up here to really showcase the differences between those. And it's really like, I'm not the FM police. Use them as you will, but just know that there are differences to these actual terminologies. And a remote microphone differs from an FM system because it's more used to just overcome speech in noisy situations over distances. It's really not designed to help in a classroom setting. Some remote systems can connect to multiple devices, while some remote systems are just merely a one-to-one connection. And the way that they're transferring signal, they're not using a digital modulation. Sometimes they're just using Bluetooth technology to function. And so the way that they're transferring that 2.6 gigahertz transfer of sound kind of makes it classified differently than what an FM or a DM would. And remote microphone systems, though, I'm not saying that they're negative in any means of technology. I would say actually the opposite, that the remote microphone systems, what they have an advantage to compared to an FM is really cost. The cost of a remote microphone system is far less than our Roger system, if we're going to compare that to kind of what the Mecca. And remote microphone systems can also be used as our third-party converter to make certain technology FM or DM compatible. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what I wanted to talk about remote microphone here as well is that the access to remote microphone may be a little bit easier as well, given that at least now modern day fittings, a lot of the companies, the main pediatric companies, are providing a remote microphone option at no charge to these families so that they have something. And if we think about it, something is truly probably better than absolutely nothing. So how does H.A.T work? So I love this little schematic, and I hope it's not confusing. So here we go. We need a transmitter, and if you think of a transmitter, let's call it a microphone for layman's terms, and this is worn by the speaker. So our teacher is wearing a transmitter. Right here we have our lovely, if you recognize it, the Inspiro. It's great. It connects to many things. This is a Phonak proprietary thing. Again, the pictures that I'm using are just of one company, but there are many different types of transmitters, which we'll review again, but this is just for how it works. Step 2, you need a hearing aid. We will talk about bone anchored and cochlear implants in a moment, but for the hearing aid kids, you need a hearing aid. And this is worn by the student. These two things alone will not communicate with one another. Because step 3, you need a receiver, okay? Now in what is now called olden day technology, because we have some cool stuff on the horizon, this receiver would come in either one or two fashions. Like I just demonstrated here, it would require like an additional battery door where you would replace their battery door, and now their battery door has become a little bit bigger because there's an FM receiver here. Or you could buy a kind of all-in-one universal receiver, such as this lovely Roger X, which is really a golden little nugget. If you have them, they're great, and you can probably understand the value of them. And you can make this Roger X compatible with the hearing aid. But what I wanted to showcase here is that these two are both considered receivers, and that's how this microphone is communicating with it. So the microphone really is not designed to communicate with the device itself. It really needs that receiver to facilitate communication. And if you're wondering how we can make this Roger X on that bottom compatible with the hearing aid on the top, we can do so by a system like adding, instead of a receiver, we would add an audio shoe. So if we see that hearing aid just to the right, it looks the same, but that's just a simple audio shoe, which then we would put a Roger X to it. So I was like, where is it? The suspense is killing me. So this and this would arguably be doing the same thing, and they would be able to communicate with this. So there's different combinations of how we can make FM or hearing assistive technology work, but you can imagine that if you don't, it takes a lot of studying to figure out what's compatible with what. But let's say you have a bone anchor device worn by the student. We can do that in other ways as well. Sometimes, and most bone anchor technology requires a third-party remote microphone. So we'll get into this in a moment. But what I wanted to showcase here is that this is also can be coupled to a Roger X. And now this is an FM compatible device. And the same with a cochlear implant. Most modern day cochlear implants have a receiver. It would be this guy back here. And that receiver would then communicate with the Inspiro, and we would have FM connectivity. And if this doesn't make you want to cry, I don't know what will, because this is the reason why this is so hard. because there's too many combinations and too many receiver numbers, and you don't know if you need a Roger 21 or an X or an AudioShoot 18. I mean, the combination, and Phonak at least does a really great job of providing guides. Like if you have a Mattel device, this is what you need to make it Roger compatible. But Roger really isn't the only thing that exists now. So we really have to be flexible in trying to get the resources that we need for these children. So I wanted to briefly talk about current compatible devices, and I was thinking, I was going back and forth with Lynn about, should I show them how to connect it? And really, the reality is, if I can be quite honest, I have to read the manual every time I get a new device. It's not intuitive. It really isn't, and it shouldn't be, because there's so many varieties and so many options and really so many combinations that it would be impossible for it truly to be intuitive. And I think I have a probably pretty good head on my shoulders of knowing the current technology that exists, but to then know the current all possibilities and combinations of hearing assistive technology that is compatible with that, whew, you gotta give me a raise for that one, is really what's gonna happen.
So Chrissy, if they wanted to get a manual, they could download?
Absolutely. So if you had a child with a specific device and you wanted to connect it with a specific device, all you need to do is go to any of these proprietary companies, and I'll list them below, and you can go to Phonak. All you just Phonak Roger Guide or Oticon Amigo Guide, and all of those companies have a resource guide. And if you want, I can actually email it to you also. If you want to email it to your listserv or whatever the case may be, that's something that I can easily do for you. I have it saved to my desktop, because anytime Lynn calls and says, hey, we have a Mattel Sonnet, or like now we have a Mattel Rondo, how do we make that FM compatible? I'm like, I don't know, but I can find out. And so those resources are really great.
Thank you.
No problem. So for our Phonak technology, and I like to start with Phonak because, again, they are the proprietary. Well, Phonak in itself is not. Phonak is owned by Sonova, but they have the proprietary Roger technology. And these devices look so cool. You may recognize some may be old, some may be brand new, but they're current hearing aids. I didn't want to dive too much into this, but I will, because it's important. And I'm really only going to talk about the main pediatric lines in this, because there are far more hearing aid companies than just 3. But I did want to talk about the primary pediatric lines, because that's really what we're seeing a lot in the school system. Now, Phonak is already inherently going to be compatible with the Roger system, but like I said before, you may need to have a receiver or something to attach to. So when I say here venture and beyond platforms, all that means is, like, if you ever saw, if the Sky rings a bell, Sky simply just means pediatrics for Phonak. So if I call Phonak and say, hey, I have a Sky device, they're gonna know immediately that you have a pediatric device. That's all that means to them, okay? It does not mean that you have a RIC device or a BT, it just means that you have a pediatric model. Then if you go to the next letter, which is a V, so I said I have a Sky V, they're gonna know that I have a Sky that's on the Venture platform, which is an older level of technology. And then 50 to 90, it's really just the trim. If you think of like leasing a car, do you want like the basic level, or do you want the, the sport fancy level? And really that just kind of has more bells and whistles. And a lot of times when we talk about this kind of trim, that's the price point for the hearing aid. And when we think about pediatrics, most pediatric institutions, I can only speak for myself, we don't really try to sell devices to these families. So a lot of these kids are in 50 level technology simply because it's good enough, right? They make it good enough, and it's most cost efficient for the families. And so next is we have a Sky B. I don't know why they did that, V and B, just to get people very confused.
Who can't hear?
Right, exactly, right, exactly. And so if you have any on the V and B, which may be memorable here, those receivers attach like battery doors, like I mentioned in that previous slide. But brand new is the Phonak Sky M, which is our Marvel platform. And what's really kind of great and novel and TBD, because it's just being released actively as we talk, is that the FM is fully integrated into the device, which is fantastic. They don't need to buy an extra part. Hold on, they don't need to physically have an extra part. Now, the crux of having all the meat and potatoes in this device, so this is a Sky Marvel BTE here. The challenges of having the FM inside of here, right, is that how do we get access to it? That's a good question. And a lot of people, I would imagine that a lot of schools are going to start asking this question more and more as more children are wearing this technology. And it was just released in, I would say I started fitting Marvels probably in end of November, early December. So very new. We're talking fresh off the market. In fact, their entire line is not even available yet. So any child who needs a device that's compatible with a more significant hearing loss, so their superpower hearing aid, is not even on the market yet in the Marvel platform. So really, if you have any children who are wearing Marvel technology, they likely have a hearing loss that's from maybe more of the mild to moderately severe max. But our moderately severe to severe kids are not eligible for this technology just yet. It's supposed to be released at the end of this month. So we're really talking about really novel technology. And the way to connect FM to this, the trick here is that you have to activate it. So while it comes inside of it, you still have to pay for it to get activated. And that was really a disappointment, I think, when they finally told everybody about this, that we finally came out with a device that's integrated with FM, but the trick is you still have to pay us to activate it. And I thought, well, that's not nice. I have the power to activate it, but if I don't get money, I can't do that. And that's not true, because that would truly draw an ethical line in my body. But the reality is that you need to have a compatible transmitter that gives you like a code to activate these FM systems. Now, if you really are challenged with this Marvel platform, and if there's any maybe teachers of the deaf ear, educational audiologist, your Phonak rep, who is your Phonak school rep, should be providing solutions for the technology that you currently have and how to make them Marvel compatible. So it is possible, but I think current day, it is very confusing and it's drawing a lot of questions, but it's exciting that it exists, okay? So that's how FM works in the Phonak. Now, they have the Roger system and their portfolio is pretty advanced from the Roger perspective. But what's really coming in, what's more common, not in the school system, but from a personal perspective, is probably our Roger Pen and our Roger Select. And what I talked about the integrated is that you can buy a standard Roger Pen or a Roger Pen IN, which would be the integrated, compatible with the integrated Roger. So if I purchased a Roger Pen IN, that would come with a little tool to then allow me to activate the FM in this guy. So that's kind of what I'm saying. You still have to purchase it to activate it, but it's ready to go once you purchase it, of course. And then another way to make it compatible is to use a third party like a ComPilot and add a Roger X to the bottom of a ComPilot to make this compatible. And then they also have remote microphone options. So you can either use this ComPilot with an older microphone or brand new partner microphone, which is actually, at least in our clinic, being distributed at no charge to these families who are getting the new Marvel technology. So you may see more of these guys in your classroom. You may see a combination of these things. But yeah, Phonak is confusing, but I hope this is at least a resource for people. Moving on, we have our Oticon devices. Now, Oticon has their own FM line, so their own version of Roger. Just to throw a wrench in the system here, they made the Amigo system. And the Amigo system has not quite been updated in quite some time. However, just recently, Oticon came out with their brand new pediatric device, which is their Open Play. And historically, a lot of kids who were using Oticon devices were in Sensei or Safari devices. And now their Open Play is still compatible with their version of FM, which is the Amigo system. And you can see that this is a Oticon Play device with a receiver attached to it. This is the Oticon receiver. But there is a way to make this, so say you only have 2 Oticon kids in your class and then the rest of your kids are wearing Phonak devices, or you as a teacher have an Inspiro, which is a Phonak device, and you need to get this compatible do not fret, there is a way to make Oticon systems compatible with your Phonak transmitter, and that's listed here. So you can attach a universal FM boot to a Roger X. So what that really means is that the patient would have an FM shoe, similar to a shoe, and then you would add a Roger X here. So it really makes it almost the size of a cochlear implant, I'm not gonna lie, but it's possible. Or you could have a streamer, which is actually only available in older technology. Their Streamer Pro had a Euro pin that you could connect your Roger X to, as shown here. However, the Streamer Pro is not compatible with their new open play technology. In fact, today, they come out with their remote microphone, which is their Connect clip. So every child getting an open play device now gets a free Connect clip. The caveat to Connect clip is that it does not have a Euro pin, so you cannot make the Connect clip FM compatible. And they just released, fresh off the market, I have actually not fit any of these, the EduMic, which the difference between the EduMic and the Connect clip is that the EduMic can connect to an infinite number of Oticon devices, still using the same platform that the Connect clip uses. So it is unclear on the Oticon website if this is truly a FMDM or a remote microphone. The other difference is that this does have a 3.5mm jack, so like an auxiliary jack that you can connect it to a computer, whereas the Connect clip does not. So some benefits, some caveats. And then I briefly wanted to talk about Resound. There's not many children in Resound. Some people may say there's a whole bunch of children in Resound. Whether they should or should not be is not something we're talking about today. But Resound, the only reason why I have mentioned it is for mostly our bimodal kids. Resound has partnered with Cochlear Americas in making their remote microphone systems compatible with both the Cochlear Americas Baha 5 and their Cochlear Americas Nucleus products, so their cochlear implants, compatible with contralateral Resound hearing aids. So they can share the same accessory, which is exciting and was a really novel thing when it came out a few years ago. Resound, however, doesn't have an own standalone integrated FM system, so they don't have a Roger or an Amigo. There is a way to make them compatible, and that is through this remote mic. And I must say that the Upsmart is their traditional pediatric line, but they have since stopped producing it. So you may have some kids in it, but they are no longer supporting a pediatric line, which was sad news for us. But to make it compatible, you're going to use the multi-mic, which you may call it a multi-mic, you may call it a mini-mic. Cochlear calls it a mini-mic, Resound calls it a multi-mic. It's actually the same exact device. And you can couple that with the Roger X, and that will stream to both the hearing aid and to the cochlear implant or the Baha, depending on what is on the other ear. Speaking of our bone anchored devices, we can briefly talk about Cochlear Americas. So the Baha 4, which is obsolete, and you're probably like, why are you talking about obsolete technology? I'm only mentioning it is because it truly had the only way of getting a true integrated FM. The Baha form came with a Euro pin connection to it, where you could put the Roger X right into the Baha, and they can put it on their head, and they would be FM compatible. By making the Baha 5 significantly smaller, they compromised that connection, and then said, well, you can still have that connection through the remote mic. So you can only make our current Baha 5 line compatible with FM using the mini mic, which is the multi-mic. Spoiler. And you can also just remove that Roger X, and it can just be your remote mic. So it can serve as just a regular microphone, or use FM technology using this Roger X. Oticon Medical also has a bone anchor device. It's called the Ponto. Ponto 3 was their old line. They just recently came out with their Ponto 4. And unfortunately, the Ponto 4 is not compatible in any way right now with an FM or DM system. That's unfortunate because a lot of kids are getting fit with the Ponto 4 because it is actually the smallest bone anchor device on the market. So it's actually 10% smaller than the Baha 5. And if anyone has seen a Baha 5 in person, it's pretty small. So the Ponto 4 is very small, and it actually also has a light, which is really advantageous for our pediatric population. It does come with a remote mic, the Connect clip, but like I said before, this Connect clip is not compatible with like a Euro pin. Now, I'm only assuming that the EduMic will be made compatible with this Ponto device. Oticon Medical obviously shares Oticon as their main company, but they always lag behind in technology. So Oticon hearing aids just came out with this EduMic, and I am only assuming that the Ponto 4 will follow. The Ponto 3 is their older technology, so if you have any kids in that, the way that FM would work would be through their streamer, which was the accessory that would come free with that Ponto 3. The new Adhere, I don't know if anyone has an Adhere patient. I'm a student. I have several patients in the Adhere, and the reality is like, well, yes, we can make it work. Mattel is a cochlear implant company who is also a bone anchored company, I must say. They, in Europe at least, have they have the Vibrant Sound Bridge, which is not FDA approved here. They also have the Bone Bridge, which is just recently FDA approved in the United States. So they are an established bone implant company. However, they have just recently come out with the Adhere, and the Adhere is an adhesive bone device, which really is really great for a niche of people who don't want to have a surgical device and don't want to wear a headband. The caveat is that it really is limited with its technology, and it's very much designed to be click it and stick it. That's really how they actually promote their technology, just like you click it on and you stick it on and you move on. It's supposed to be very simple. It is not really designed, it wasn't designed with the intent to be very compatible with all the cool stuff technology, because that's kind of the caveat of having a sticker device. Now, there is a way you could make it FM compatible. This is not a Europin connector, although it looks like one. It is just a 3-prong DAI cable that then you could attach to an external battery pack that then you could put a Roger X on. But I'm going to be honest, that defeats the purpose of wearing the Adhere to begin with, because like I'm telling you, these kids are wearing the Adheres because they don't want anything to be noticed, let alone a cable hanging from their device. So I would be very intrigued to see a child wearing an Adhere with this DAI setup, but it is possible. So that's the exciting part. And then our cochlear implant companies, we obviously have Cochlear Americas. Cochlear Americas does have integrated Roger receivers. The Nucleus 5 and 6 have the Roger 14, which is this guy. The Nucleus 7 uses the Roger 20, which is that guy up there. And then the Canso, which is the off-ear processor, can only be made FM compatible using the mini mic and the Roger X configuration. You can also make the Nucleus products FM compatible through the mini mic, but they do have their integrated receiver, which is ideal. All the literature has suggested that an integrated receiver is better than using a third-party communication, but there's options with the cochlear devices. And that's, again, their mini mic with the Roger X. And Mattel, like we discussed with their Adhere, they have cochlear implants. They have the Sonnet. They actually have the Sonnet 1 and the Sonnet 2 right now. Although the aesthetics of the devices have not changed at all. So the external parts and pieces are the same in that they come with the Sonnet comes with a battery sleeve that has the Europin that you can put a Phonak Roger X in to make the Sonnet compatible with FM. And then the Rondos 1 and 2 need an external battery pack. So this is what I was talking about that here. They need this external battery pack, which then connects to this little Roger X. And that's how you can make this off-ear processor FM compatible. But again, I would argue that children who are wearing the Canso, the Rondo devices, oops, I kept Canso up here too, but I meant Rondo. The Rondo devices are probably wearing them because they don't tolerate much else on their body. So this seems a little cumbersome. The Sonnet 2 actually also has the audio link, and which is a remote microphone. So this is a microphone. It also is a Bluetooth connector. It also is a remote control. So it is a 3-in-1 device. It's brand new. So you may or may not see it. I think I only have maybe one child in a Sonnet 2 that just got activated like 2 weeks ago. So they are actively pushing these out on the market right now. And lastly, advanced bionics. Timely, of course, but still relevant. A lot of kids are wearing advanced bionics devices. They share the same proprietary company as Phonak in that they are both owned by Sonova. So making FM compatibility with AB devices is not as challenging in that the Naida Q70 and 90 processors come with this little receiver, which is the Roger 17, and that alone can connect to any Roger device. You can also have a Roger X combo through their ComPilot 1. So this was an accessory option for some kids, and they can put a Roger X on the bottom of this. I will say that this is considered obsolete, so this is not even an option anymore in today's Q90 products, but if you have a child in Q70s, they may still have a ComPilot 1. And interestingly, if you call Phonak to service your ComPilot 1, they will tell you that they don't do that anymore. You have to get it exclusively from Advanced Bionics, even though they have the same fathering company. And then the Neptune, which is a fully waterproof device. It is rather old, but still being fit to this day, has not been upgraded because it is tried and true, full waterproof. Using the Neptune Connect, you can connect a Roger X to this. This is an off-ear processor, so again, I don't know how many people are making this compatible with FM, but it exists. And then the last thing I wanted to mention with our AV devices is that the ComPilot is obsolete, but the NAIDA Connect has just recently been released, and this is made for streaming. So if a child wanted to stream to any Bluetooth device, they could do so with this. However, the caveat is you're compromising your Roger receiver for your Connect, so you kind of have to choose one in that point. What else? So in the sake of time, this is probably wrapping up. We do have off-ear options for hearing assistive technology, and this is really for children who have normal hearing, and this is just maybe classroom options. So there's sound field systems that exist. There's a pass-around mic, the multimedia hub, which would allow a Roger system to connect to a smartboard as well, so the child can hear what's coming from the smartboard as well as the teacher at the same time. And solutions for normal hearing, there's some ear level processors, such as the Roger Focus or the Amigo Star, which are just meant for maybe children who have attention deficits, auditory processing deficits that don't have hearing loss. So they don't need amplification, they just need the FM signal. And who will this help? Like we said before, children with APD, learning disabilities, unilateral hearing loss, autism, spectrum disorder, children who are ESOL, on top of those who already have hearing loss. Where is the future taking us? Well, we need some legislation to start supporting FM systems, at least the funding for them. The reality is, at least in Florida, we're still trying to get funding for hearing aids. So this is probably a little bit in the future, but I don't doubt that we're gonna get there. It's just, we're slow on the bandwagon. We also wanna use maybe more of the use of wireless microphones in the interim, seeing as if FM is a costly option that is prohibiting school systems from implementing them, then maybe having the counter remote microphone as an option would be great. And really clinics need to start more clinical testing to see how it's really applicable in a real world setting versus testing just for the purpose of research. While research is important, we have a lot of data suggesting things work, but we have to make them applicable in the real world setting. So what's better? Some research has been compelling evidence to suggest that the remote microphone is actually yielding better outcomes than FM, but I don't want to reveal any spoilers. That's just some competitive research here. But what do we know for sure? Using one FM with bilateral hearing loss is better than no FM at all. However, one FM on each ear is ideal, okay? The evidence suggests this with both hearing aid users and cochlear implant recipients. 2 ears are always going to be better than 1. Any questions?
I didn't see any in the chat.
Great.
Man, that was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
My
you.
email is here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, and I can also email those guides to Lynn to share with you all as well.
And we have actually created a hearing assistive technology live binder. So we
I actually checked that out. That was really cool.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I wish I had this when I was at the W school.
So we can add anything that you send, we can add to the live binder so that everyone can have access to it. So
Great.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Let me actually.
Well, friends, we do want to thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanchez, and thank you so much, Lynn, for being here today. We're excited that you're going to help us keep our hat on.
Yes, I hope so.
We also want to take this time to thank our CART provider, Ann Armstrong from Alternative Communication Services, for providing our captions for today. And finally, thank you so much to all of you watching for allowing us to be a part of your day. The recording will be posted on our RMTC-DHH website, We love hearing from you, and we're happy to help in any way you can. You can connect with us through social media like Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. You can also sign up for our newsletter. We would love your comments on social media about what you learned, but make sure you use hashtag RMTC-DHH and hashtag Florida Deaf Ed. As you know, we are a Florida Department of Education, Bureau of Exceptional Education and Student Services discretionary project, and all of the services that we and the Debbie School provide are provided at no cost to people who utilize those services. To continue our work, we have to collect survey data to justify why our services are needed. If you could please complete the survey in the chat box right now, we would greatly appreciate it. The survey is at bit.ly/RMTC-EVAL. If you have a colleague who missed this broadcast or you'd like to rewatch it later, you can head over to our website, www.rmtcdhh.org/TA-live. Thank you again from all of the RMTC staff. We will be ending the broadcast now. Thank you, ladies, so much.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
bye.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.